She swore 1,000 times she would be different. She wrote it in her journals. She promised herself. She made it clear to everyone that she would never, ever become like her own mother. And then, one Sunday afternoon, as her 6-year-old daughter cried on the living room floor, she heard the words coming out of her own mouth. "You're exaggerating. Stop being so dramatic. I went through worse things at your age and didn't make such a big deal about it." The same words, the same voice, the same coldness. For a split second, and she didn't recognize who was speaking. And when she realized it was herself, she felt an icy terror crawl up her spine, because it wasn't a choice. She didn't think before speaking. The words simply came out, automatic, as if someone else was in control. And it was in that exact moment that she understood the most terrifying truth about narcissism. It's not something you choose. It's something that chooses you. It replicates through you, multiplies automatically, and if you don't confront it consciously, it will spread through your lineage like a psychological virus, contaminating entire generations. Carl Jung spent decades studying a phenomenon that most people would rather not see. Families don't just destroy one generation. They create automatic cycles that repeat through entire lineages. Narcissistic grandparents beget narcissistic parents, who beget narcissistic children, who, without conscious intervention, will beget narcissistic grandchildren. And the most disturbing part, most of the people who perpetuate these cycles are the very ones who most hated the narcissism of their own parents. You don't have to love your narcissistic parents to replicate their patterns. You just have to have grown up under their influence, because narcissism isn't transmitted through genetics. It's not taught through sermons. It installs itself through something much more insidious that Jung called autonomous complexes, sub-personalities within your psyche that function automatically, without you realizing it. Running patterns from previous generations like software in the background, and when you finally realize you're doing exactly what you swore you'd never do, the cycle has already contaminated another generation. In the next few minutes, you're going to understand exactly how narcissism multiplies, why willpower alone can't break the cycle, and the only path that Jung identified to interrupt this generational transmission of trauma before it irreversibly contaminates the next generation. The most terrifying question you can ask about your own life is this: how many times have you caught yourself saying, doing, reacting exactly like your narcissistic mother or father? And worse, how many times did you only realize it afterward, when you'd already hurt someone, already invalidated an emotion, already used the same toxic words that you heard your entire life and swore you'd never repeat? Because the multiplication of narcissism happens exactly in that moment of unconsciousness. You don't decide to become a narcissist. You are possessed by patterns that live inside you as autonomous entities. And as long as those patterns remain unconscious, they're going to continue replicating automatically through you, contaminating every relationship, every generation, every opportunity for true love that you encounter. Ryan was 28 when he finally agreed to go to therapy. Not because he wanted to, but because his girlfriend gave him an ultimatum: get help or she was leaving. And she wasn't kidding. In the first session, the therapist asked a question that seemed absurd. "Tell me about your childhood with your mom." Ryan rolled his eyes. "I didn't come here to talk about my childhood. I came to solve my relationship problems." The therapist insisted. "Just tell me one thing. How did your mom react when you messed something up?" And that's when something started to crack inside him. She'd look at me with this icy contempt, like, "How could you be so incompetent?" She never yelled, but the silence was worse. She'd just treat me like I didn't exist until I fixed whatever mistake I made. Sometimes she wouldn't talk to me for days, and I'd be desperate to do anything to get her to notice me again. The therapist noted something and asked, "And how do you react when your girlfriend makes a mistake?" Ryan opened his mouth to answer and stopped. The air rushed out of his lungs because he saw it. Exactly the same thing. When she forgot something important, when she made a mistake. He didn't yell, didn't curse. He simply shut down, became icy, responded with monosyllables, treated her as if she didn't exist until she apologized, humiliated herself, proved that she deserved attention again. "I do the same thing." His voice was trembling. "I swear I hate when my mom does that to me, and I do exactly the same thing to the people I love." The therapist looked at him with that calm that only comes from someone who's seen this revelation happen hundreds of times. "You're not doing this, Ryan. An autonomous complex is doing it through you. As long as it remains unconscious, it's going to continue running automatically. And you're going to continue replicating your mom, exactly as she replicated her mom, who replicated her grandmother. This isn't genetics. It's psychic inheritance. And if you don't interrupt it consciously, you're going to pass it on to your children too." Jung discovered something that most therapists still don't fully understand. When you grow up in a narcissistic family, you don't just absorb observable behaviors. You absorb entire psychic structures, complete complexes, ways of processing emotions, of reacting to threats, of punishing vulnerability, of manipulating through silence or invasion. And these structures don't just stay stored in memory as a recollection. They install themselves as autonomous subpersonalities within your psyche. You can consciously hate what your parents did, but unconsciously, they're complex lives inside you, waiting for the right trigger to take control and make you act exactly like them. That's why you can spend years in cognitive therapy, rationally understand all the toxic patterns, swear you'll be different, and yet, in a moment of stress, in a moment of conflict, you act automatically like them, because it's not you acting, it's the complex. And complexes can't be convinced with rational arguments. They only integrate when they're brought to the light of consciousness, confronted, processed emotionally, and finally chosen consciously instead of automatically obeyed. Ryan spent the next 6 months in a painful process. Every time he felt that urge to shut down emotionally, to punish his girlfriend with icy silence, he had to stop, recognize, this isn't me, it's the maternal complex, and then do the hardest thing in the world, do something different, speak aloud what he was feeling instead of shutting down. "I feel hurt right now, and my impulse is to punish you with silence, but I know that's my mom's pattern. So instead of shutting down, I'm going to actually talk about what I'm feeling." At first, it felt fake, forced. Like I was reading from a script instead of acting naturally. But that was exactly the point. What I called natural was the autonomous complex. What felt forced was the true self, finally having space to exist. And the more I practiced conscious choice instead of automatic reaction, the more the complex lost its grip. Until the day my girlfriend made a pretty big mistake. She forgot an important appointment we'd made weeks in advance. And for the first time in my life, Ryan felt the anger, felt the urge to punish her with coldness, but he didn't give in. He chose differently. "I'm upset. This appointment was important to me, but I love you, and I know you didn't forget on purpose. Let's reschedule." My girlfriend was shocked. "Who are you and what have you done with Ryan?" she joked, but she had tears in her eyes, because it was the first time I'd chosen love over punishment, connection over control, true self over an inherited complex. And that night, alone, Ryan cried for the first time in years, not from sadness but from relief, because I was finally free, not from my mom, but from the maternal complex that lived inside me. And for the first time, I had real hope that the cycle could end with me. But hold on, because the most important part about the generational transmission of complexes is coming up. And it's something that most people don't want to hear. Breaking the cycle doesn't simply mean doing the opposite of your parents. In fact, doing the opposite is often just another way of being controlled by the same complex. Jung called this enantiodromia, the tendency of the psyche to swing to the opposite extreme. And it's a trap that captures millions of children of narcissists who think they're breaking the cycle, when in reality, they've only inverted the pattern. Emily grew up with a controlling mom. Everything in her life was monitored, criticized, corrected. Her mom chose her clothes, her friends, her activities. She invaded Emily's room, read her journals, and questioned every decision. Emily swore that when she had kids, she'd be completely different, and she was. When her daughter was born, Emily made a point of being the opposite of her own mom. Zero control, total freedom. Her daughter could choose everything: what to eat, when to sleep, whether or not to go to school. Emily prided herself on being a free mom, with no oppressive rules, no invasion. Exactly the opposite of the narcissistic mother she had. But at 12 years old, her daughter was completely lost, anxious, without boundaries, constantly testing her parents, hoping someone would say no, that someone would create structure, that someone would care enough to set healthy limits. And it was during a family therapy session that the therapist said something that broke Emily. You're not being the opposite of your mom. You're being controlled by the same complex, just in the opposite direction. Your mom controlled you through invasion. You control your daughter through abandonment. Both are forms of narcissism. Your mom used you as a narcissistic extension. You use your daughter as narcissistic validation of your freedom. In both cases, the child isn't seen as a separate person. She's used to compensate for the mother's unresolved wounds. Emily felt like she'd been punched in the gut. I've spent my whole life trying not to be my mum. And you're saying I am her? The therapist shook his head. No, you are you. But you're possessed by her maternal complex. And as long as you react against her, instead of individuating from her, the complex remains in control. It's just changed its disguise. Jung said that individuation isn't doing the opposite of your parents. It's becoming who you really are, independent of them. And that only happens when you stop reacting and start choosing consciously. Not because of them, not against them, but for yourself. 3 invisible mechanisms cause narcissism to multiply through generations. And you need to recognize all 3, or you'll perpetuate the cycle without realizing it. First, unconscious identification. You absorb patterns from your parents, not because you agree with them, but because you were exposed to them during the critical window of development. Between 0 and 7 years old, a child doesn't distinguish self from other. They absorb everything from the environment as if it were their own. If your mom reacted with emotional coldness when you cried, your brain recorded coldness as an automatic response to crying. If your dad punished vulnerability with contempt, your nervous system learned that vulnerability is dangerous and must be destroyed. It doesn't matter if you consciously hate these patterns. They were installed before consciousness formed, and they'll run automatically until you consciously uninstall them through individuation. Second, projection of the unintegrated shadow. Everything you don't integrate into yourself, you project onto others, especially your children. If you've never emotionally processed your own repressed vulnerability, when your child shows vulnerability, you'll unconsciously attack because they're activating the shadow you buried. If you've never integrated your need for attention and validation, when your child asks for attention, you'll unconsciously punish because they're touching the wound you've denied your whole life. Your children become screens for your unconscious projections. And you'll treat them exactly how your parents treated you, even while swearing you'd be different, unless you do the work of integrating your shadow before projecting it onto the next generation. Third, unconscious loyalty to family patterns. There's something in the psyche that Jung recognized but never fully explained, an invisible force that pulls you to replicate family patterns, even when you consciously reject them, as if betraying the pattern is betraying the family. Bert Hellinger, decades after Jung, called this systemic loyalty. Children unconsciously choose to suffer rather than betray family loyalty, even when loyalty means perpetuating abuse, even when it means sacrificing their own happiness. And the only way to break this invisible loyalty is to bring it to consciousness and consciously choose something greater than loyalty. Choose individuation. Choose wholeness. Choose to break the cycle. Even if it means betraying the psychic inheritance of entire generations. Ryan, months after that first revelation about the maternal complex, was back in therapy again. But this time, the topic was different. He and his girlfriend were thinking about having kids, and for the first time, Ryan felt real terror. What if I do to my child what my mom did to me? What if the pattern continues? The therapist responded with a question. Do you recognize the complex when it appears? Ryan thought and nodded. Yes, now I recognize it. I feel it trying to take over. That urge to shut down, to punish with silence. But I don't just automatically obey anymore. I choose differently. My therapist smiled. So, the cycle's already broken. Because breaking the cycle doesn't mean you'll never feel the complex's impulses again. It means recognizing them and consciously choosing not to obey. You'll never completely get rid of the maternal complex. But you don't have to. You just need to recognize it and choose differently when it appears. And if you do that consistently, your child won't absorb the complex. They'll absorb the ability to choose consciously, which is the only psychic inheritance worth passing on. And that's exactly what happened. 3 years later, Ryan became a father. And in the first few weeks, the complex tested him in ways he hadn't anticipated. The baby was crying at 3 in the morning. Ryan was exhausted, and he felt that old coldness rising up and that impulse to shut down, to ignore, to punish need with emotional abandonment. But he stopped. He recognized it. This is the complex. It's not my son attacking me. It's a baby who needs me. And he chose differently. He picked up his son, looked into his eyes, hummed softly even though he couldn't sing. And as he cradled that small body, he felt something breaking inside his chest. It wasn't pain, it was liberation. Because he was doing something that generations of his family had failed to do. He was choosing presence instead of absence, connection instead of coldness, self instead of complex. And in that moment, at 3 in the morning, exhausted but present, Ryan understood the deepest truth about breaking generational cycles. It's not about never feeling the destructive impulses again. It's about recognizing them and choosing love anyway. And when you do that consistently, the cycle doesn't pass to the next generation. Because your child doesn't absorb the complex, they absorb the conscious choice, which is the only thing that can truly stop the multiplication of narcissism through the generations. But there's an even more critical moment that you need to understand, and it's something that most people trying to break the cycle aren't warned about. There will be a day when you fail. There will be a moment when the complex takes control before you even realize it, and you'll do exactly what you swore you'd never do. You'll invalidate. You'll punish. You'll use the same toxic words your parents used, and when that happens, the temptation will be to give up, to think it's impossible to break the cycle. that you're destined to repeat it, that there's no point in trying. But Carl Jung discovered something crucial about that moment of failure. It's exactly there that the real work of individuation happens. It's not in perfection, it's in repair. As Jung himself said, "I am not what happened to me, I am what I choose to become." Emily was 35 years old and had 2 kids when she finally confronted the maternal complex that had spanned 4 generations. Her great-grandmother had been cruel. Her grandmother replicated the cruelty. Her mom tried to be different, but only inverted it into emotional neglect, and Emily swore she would break the cycle. She spent years in therapy, read books on conscious parenting, practice meditation, and she was doing well until that day. Her 7-year-old daughter spilled juice on the new couch, and before Emily could process it, the words just came out. "You're so careless. You always ruin everything. You never pay attention." The same words her mother used to say, the same tone of voice, the same energy of contempt. The little girl froze. Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't cry. And it was that freezing that broke Emily, because she recognized it. It was exactly how she herself reacted as a child. She'd freeze, swallow the tears, disappear inside to survive the emotional attack. She had just done to her own daughter what she hated most being done to her. Emily could have done what most people do in that moment: rationalize, minimize. "Oh, it was just one time, it's not that bad." Or do the opposite, collapse into paralyzing guilt, convince herself she was an irreparable monster, give up trying. But she did something different. Something her therapist had prepared her to do for exactly this moment. She knelt down in front of her daughter and told the truth. "Sweetheart, I just spoke to you the way my mom spoke to me, and it was wrong. You're not careless. You're a 7-year-old and accidents happen. What I said hurt you, and I am so sorry." The girl looked at her confused, because she had never seen an adult admit a mistake like that. "It's okay, Mom." Emily shook her head. "No, it's not okay. And it's important you know that. What I did hurt, and when I hurt you again, because it probably will happen again, you have permission to tell me. You don't have to freeze and pretend it's okay. You can speak. Mom, that hurt me. And I will listen, because I love you for real, not just when you're perfect, but especially when you're human." The girl started to cry, but it wasn't crying from pain. It was crying from relief, because for the first time in her life, she was being seen, not idealized, not used, but seen. And in that 2-minute repair, Emily did something that 4 generations of her family had never managed to do. She broke the pattern, not by never failing, but by repairing when she failed. And that repair taught her daughter something infinitely more valuable than perfection. It taught her that it's possible to make mistakes and come back. It's possible to hurt someone you love and acknowledge the mistake. It's possible to be imperfectly human and still offer real love. And that is exactly what interrupted the transmission of the complex. Because complexes feed on denial. They replicate through patterns not recognized, not admitted, not repaired. But when you recognize, admit, and repair, the complex loses power, and the child doesn't absorb the pattern. They absorb the possibility of being human without fragmenting. You've just spent the last few minutes uncovering truths about generational narcissism that most people will never understand. You've seen how autonomous complexes replicate automatically through generations. You learned about enantiodromia and the trap of simply doing the opposite of your parents. You understood the 3 invisible mechanisms that make narcissism multiply, and you saw that breaking the cycle isn't about perfection, but about conscious recognition and repair when you fail. This information has been ignored for decades because it's uncomfortable, because it forces people to look at themselves with brutal honesty. Few channels have the courage to reveal the truth about how you might be replicating exactly what you hate most about your parents. Every video like this requires deep research into Jungian psychology and the courage to speak truths that most prefer not to hear. The super thanks down there isn't just financial support. It's you saying that this truth about generational transmission of narcissism needs to be known. When you click that golden heart, you're helping to free other people from the invisible prison of inherited complexes. You're not just a spectator, you're a conscious survivor who's choosing to break the cycle. And by supporting this work, you become part of the movement that's stopping the multiplication of narcissism across generations. Madison, 5 years after that crucial repair with her daughter, realized something extraordinary. It wasn't that the maternal complex had disappeared completely. It still showed up. Sometimes she still felt that impulse to criticize, to invalidate, to emotionally punish. But the difference was radical. Now she recognized it, in real time. And most of the time, she managed to pause before acting automatically. And when she didn't, when the complex escaped and she acted destructively, she repaired it every time without exception. And it was through this practice of recognizing and repairing, recognizing and repairing, recognizing and repairing, that something miraculous happened. The daughter developed something that 4 generations of the family had never had: integrated self. She knew who she was, trusted her own emotions, wasn't ashamed of vulnerability, didn't need external validation to know her worth. And when friends commented on how emotionally balanced she was, Madison felt tears in her eyes because she knew the truth. It wasn't because she was a perfect mom, it was because she was a real mom, human, imperfect, but present, conscious, and willing to repair. According to Carl Jung, this repair is what truly breaks the cycle. And then came the ultimate test. The daughter, now 12 years old, came home from school and broke down. A group of girls had excluded her in a cruel way, and when she told what happened, crying, Madison felt the complex rising. That old impulse. "You're exaggerating. These things happen. Stop being so dramatic." The same words that her mum would have said, that her grandmother would have said, that entire generations would have said. But Madison stopped, breathed, recognized the complex, and chose differently. She sat next to her daughter, put her hand on her shoulder, and said something that no woman in her lineage had ever said. "That must have hurt a lot. You have every right to be upset. Tell me everything." And while the daughter cried and told her story, Madison didn't try to fix it, didn't minimize it, didn't distract, just stayed present in the pain, witnessed it, validated it. And when the daughter finally stopped crying and looked at her, there was something in her eyes that Madison had never seen before. Gratitude, not for having solved the problem, but for having stayed, for not running away from the emotion, for having seen the pain, and not trying to erase it. And that night, alone, Madison understood something that changed everything. The cycle wasn't broken because she did everything right. It was broken because she chose presence over flight, chose validation over invalidation, chose love over control. And when you do that consistently, even failing sometimes, but always repairing, you not only break the cycle, you create a new inheritance, an inheritance of awareness, of choice, of real love. And that is what multiplies through the next generations. This truth aligns perfectly with Carl Jung's theories on the collective unconscious and individuation. The ultimate truth about generational narcissism that Jung discovered is this: you can't change the past. You can't fix what your parents did to you. You can't erase the complexes that were installed during your childhood, but you have absolute control over one thing: whether those complexes will continue multiplying through you or whether they will stop. And that choice doesn't happen once. It happens every day. Every time you recognize the destructive impulse and choose differently. Every time you fail and repair instead of denying. Every time you choose awareness over automatism, and when you do that consistently, something extraordinary happens. The cycle stops. Not perfectly, not completely, but significantly. And the next generation doesn't inherit the complex. It inherits the ability to choose, which is the only real antidote to the multiplication of narcissism across generations. You have that power, not to never feel the destructive impulses again, but to recognize them and choose love anyway. And that choice, repeated consistently, is what finally interrupts the generational transmission of trauma. It's what finally allows the wound to stop contaminating. It's what finally breaks the cycle that seemed like it would never end. Carl Jung believed in the power of individual choice to impact the collective unconscious, and breaking these cycles is a perfect example. So tell me something. What phrase from your narcissistic parents do you catch yourself repeating unintentionally? Write it here in the comments. Not to shame you, but because recognizing it is the first step to breaking the cycle. And when you write it, you bring it to consciousness. And consciousness is what autonomous complexes fear most.